One act of kindness from a waitress touched a billionaire's broken heart and transformed his son's entire world. Adrian Cole, billionaire, CEO, and one of the most untouchable men in the city, walked into a small family-style restaurant with his 8-year-old son, Liam, who had cerebral palsy. His security waited outside. His assistant sat far away. He preferred no one close, because closeness hurt. Liam struggled to sit properly, his movements jerky and uncontrolled. Every restaurant usually stared, whispered, or pretended not to notice the boy. Adrian hated it. He hated their pity. He hated that he couldn't fix his son. Today felt no different until she walked in. A waitress, young, dark-skinned, with tired eyes but a gentle smile, approached quietly. "Would your son like help?" she asked softly. Adrian froze. Most people ignored Liam. This woman walked straight to him with calm confidence. She introduced herself. "My name is Nia." And for the first time in weeks, Liam made a tiny sound, almost like a laugh. Adrian stared. Something inside him shifted. Liam tried to lift his spoon again, his small fingers trembling with the effort. The metal slipped from his grip and clattered softly against the plate. His shoulders tensed, his jaw tightened, and frustration flickered across his face like a passing storm cloud. Adrian instinctively leaned forward, panic rising in his throat. Every meal felt like a test, one he feared failing. The slightest slip made him feel helpless, like he wasn't doing enough, wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't strong enough for his son. His hand darted out on its own, ready to intervene, ready to fix. But Nia placed her hand gently over his. Not a firm stop. Just a reminder. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice warm, steady. "Let me try." Before Adrian could respond, she moved beside Liam with the fluid grace of someone who didn't see disability, only a child trying his best. She crouched low, lowering herself until her eyes met Liam's. She didn't tower over him. She didn't pity him. She simply matched him, inch for inch, breath for breath. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. "Let's try again, nice and slow." Liam blinked, his eyes wide and uncertain, but there was trust there, fragile, glowing, unspoken. Nia held the spoon again, but she didn't feed him. She guided his hand, letting him feel the weight, the motion, the rhythm. She let him lead. Once, twice. On the third try, the spoon wobbled dangerously, and Adrian's heart clenched tight, but Nia didn't flinch. Her fingers steadied Liam's wrist, not doing it for him, just helping him find control. And then, the spoon reached his mouth. Liam's lips curled upward, a small, uncertain smile, the kind of smile that felt like sunshine peeking through heavy clouds. Adrian let out a breath he didn't even realize he'd been holding, one he'd been carrying for months, maybe years. Relief washed over him so quickly it almost made him dizzy. All around them, the restaurant had softened into quiet stillness. Conversations faded. Forks paused midair. People weren't staring in judgment. They were witnessing tenderness, patience, and a miracle far too small for headlines, yet enormous for one father's heart. Nia didn't rush. She didn't sigh. She didn't look around for approval. She simply existed in that moment with Liam, as if the rest of the world had stepped back to give them space. "You did it," she said gently, brushing a stray curl from Liam's forehead. "See, you're stronger than you think." Liam made a small sound, half giggle, half chirp, and Nia's face lit up with genuine joy. Adrian swallowed hard. No pity. No discomfort. No awkwardness. Just kindness. Kindness pure enough to shake something loose in his chest, something he'd kept locked away for too long, guilt, fear, heartbreak, exhaustion, all tangled together. He had hired nurses, therapists, specialists, but this young woman, this waitress in a simple apron, had given Liam something none of them had. Time. Patience. Gentle, unhurried humanity. Adrian rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly feeling exposed, like someone had peeled away the layers he'd been hiding behind. Was this what kindness looked like? Not grand, not dramatic, not planned. Just a moment where someone chose to care when they didn't have to. And for the first time in a long while, Adrian realized something. Maybe hope didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it came on small hands, steady hands, guided by a stranger with a heart big enough for both of them. After feeding Liam, Nia wiped his mouth gently and turned to Adrian with a question so simple it didn't seem to belong in the chaos of all the therapies, appointments, and medical terms he lived with every day. Does he like music? Adrian paused, confused, almost offended by the simplicity of it. Music, he echoed, as if the word itself was foreign. Nia nodded, her expression soft but curious. Children who struggle with coordination sometimes respond better when rhythm guides them. It gives their bodies something to follow, like a map. Before he could answer, she pulled out her phone, scrolling with the familiarity of someone who used music not just for noise, but for healing. A gentle melody filled the space between them, soft piano notes that seemed to float in the air like feathers. Liam's reaction was immediate. His eyes widened, brightened, alive in a way Adrian rarely saw outside his therapy sessions. His fingers twitched, then moved, not in frustration this time, but in excitement. His arms jerked slightly to the rhythm, uncontrolled yet undeniably joyful. Adrian's heart twisted. How many times had he tried to help his son? How many times had he sat beside him, helpless, desperate for any sign of progress? Yet no therapist, no specialist, no high-priced expert had mentioned music, not a single one. His jaw tightened, not with anger at Nia, but at himself, at the system, at the world. Nobody told me that, he said quietly, almost ashamed. Nia didn't flinch. Did anyone take the time to try? She asked, her tone neither sharp nor judgmental, just honest, painfully honest. The question hit harder than any criticism could. Adrian felt it in his chest, in the place where guilt had been living for years. He stared at her, this woman with no expensive degree hanging on her wall, no prestigious title, no status that commanded attention, just a waitress with a warm voice and an observant heart. Yet somehow, she understood his son better than the specialists he had hired, the ones he trusted, the ones he had paid small fortunes to. She saw Liam, not the diagnosis, not the limitations, not the charts filled with numbers and prognosis. She saw the boy. Adrian swallowed, suddenly feeling smaller, humbled, exposed. How had someone with so little seen so much, and why had he missed it? During a quiet moment, Adrian asked, "How do you know so much about children with special needs?" The restaurant noise faded into a distant hum, as if the world itself leaned closer to hear her answer. Nia hesitated, her fingers folding into her apron, her posture shrinking just slightly, as though the question had touched a part of her she'd spent years guarding. Finally, she exhaled, a soft, fragile breath that carried the weight of memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. "My little brother had cerebral palsy," she said, her voice steady but threaded with an old ache. "I raised him. Our mother worked 2 jobs, so it was mostly on me." Adrian felt something shift in the room, like a curtain being pulled away to reveal a truth he hadn't been prepared for. Suddenly the patience, the intuition, the quiet confidence, everything made sense in a way that hit deeper than he expected. But before he could respond, she continued, her eyes drifting somewhere far beyond the walls of the restaurant. "He was 6 when our dad left. Mom was never home except late at night, exhausted. So I learned how to feed him, how to move his arms without hurting him, how to help him stretch. I learned his rhythms, his sounds, his ways of saying I'm scared or I'm tired without words." She swallowed, her throat tightening. "I learned everything by loving him." Adrian felt the air thicken with emotion he couldn't name. "Where is he now?" he asked gently, afraid of the answer even before it came. Nia's hands stilled. She looked down, eyelashes trembling. "He passed away when he was 11. Her voice didn't crack, not once, but her eyes did, glimmering with a grief so deep it had clearly carved itself into her bones. It wasn't the loud kind of grief, not the kind that demanded attention. It was the quiet kind, the kind a person learned to fold into themselves because the world didn't stop for their pain. "He had a seizure in his sleep," she whispered. "I was the one who found him." Adrian's breath caught. She said it with a calmness that only came from years of replaying the moment, years of forcing herself to keep going because life never gave her the luxury of breaking down. "I was 13, she added, "too young to lose him, old enough to understand every second of it." She blinked away the tears that threatened to fall, but one slipped free anyway, tracing a soft path down her cheek. "I see him in your son," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "not because they're the same, but because children like them deserve gentleness. They deserve someone who sees who they are, not what they struggle with." Her fingers brushed the edge of the table, as if grounding herself in the moment. "And I won't let any child feel unseen, not if I can help it." Adrian felt something in his chest crack open, something he hadn't realized had hardened over the years. He had met CEOs, politicians, world leaders. He had spoken to people with influence, power, and wealth beyond measure, but none, had ever spoken with such raw, unfiltered truth, such open-hearted vulnerability, such unpolished sincerity. As he watched her, he realized that every instinct she had shown with Liam wasn't taught in a classroom. It was carved from lived experience, from childhood wounds, from responsibility far beyond her years. She had learned patience not from textbooks, but from nights spent waking at every small sound, checking if her brother was breathing. She had learned gentleness not from training, but from fear, constant, quiet fear that one wrong move might cause him pain. She had learned intuition not from any certification, but from love, the kind that demanded sacrifice without reward, recognition, or applause. "You carry all that alone?" Adrian asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Nia shrugged slightly, but there was a sadness in the gesture. "It's not something people usually want to hear," she said. "Most folks get uncomfortable, or they pity me. I don't want pity, I just want to make someone's life easier if I can." She lifted her eyes again, and this time the grief mingled with something else, something fierce and protective. "When I saw your son struggling, I remembered my brother's face, how hard he tried, how proud he looked when he could do something by himself. People underestimate children like them. They don't realize how much strength it takes to do the simplest things." Adrian swallowed hard, guilt rising within him. Had he underestimated Liam too? Had he been so lost in fear, fear of losing him, fear of failing him, that he had missed the parts of his son that were still fighting, still learning, still reaching for the world in his own way? Nia continued gently, "Liam isn't broken, Adrian. He's just wired differently. He just needs someone willing to meet him where he is." Her words were simple, but they hit him with the force of truth. All the money he had spent, all the specialists he had hired, all the schedules he had followed, none of them had ever spoken about Liam like this. None of them had seen him the way she did. It left Adrian unsteady, humbled, and strangely grateful. He looked at Nia, truly looked at her, not as a waitress, not as an employee, not as someone passing through his day, but as a person shaped by heartbreak and resilience in equal measure. A person who had carried the weight of a little boy's world on her shoulders before she was even old enough to drive. A person who had lost more than most adults ever would, yet still chose kindness over bitterness, compassion over caution. And in that moment, Adrian realized something else, something he wasn't ready to admit out loud. He trusted her, more than he trusted his own judgment, more than he trusted the professionals, more than he trusted himself. Because for the first time in a long time, someone wasn't telling him what Liam couldn't do. She was showing him what Liam still could. Liam suddenly coughed, a sharp, harsh sound that sliced through the restaurant's gentle hum, and then choked on a piece of food. The shift was instant, terrifying, the kind of moment every parent dreads, but Adrian feared with a different intensity, one born from years of emergencies, hospital visits, silent nights checking if his son was still breathing. Adrian's heart stopped. Panic slammed into him like a physical impact, flooding his chest, his throat, his limbs. His hand flew toward Liam, trembling with instinctive desperation, but before he could reach him, Nia moved, fast, steady, calm, as if her body knew exactly what to do before her mind even formed the command. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice so soft, so controlled, it felt like she was wrapping Liam in safety. She positioned him upright with gentle precision, supporting his head, rubbing small circles on his back, guiding his breathing with rhythmic, soothing motions. Liam sputtered, coughed again, then slowly eased, the tension melting from his small body as air finally returned to his lungs. The entire ordeal lasted seconds, but to Adrian it stretched into something endless and suffocating. When Liam relaxed, leaning into Nia's touch as though his tiny body recognized her as a place of comfort, Adrian felt his own muscles weaken with relief. He stood frozen, staring at her hands, those hands that didn't shake, didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess. Hands that moved with experience, patience, and certainty born not from textbooks, but from life, from love, from a history she had buried deep inside herself long before this moment. She had acted with the confidence of someone who had done this before, someone who had lived through moments like this and survived them, not once, but countless times. People around the restaurant watched with wide eyes, then began clapping softly, a hushed, respectful applause that carried gratitude rather than curiosity. They weren't clapping for a performance. They were acknowledging the grace and bravery of a young woman who didn't do what most would have: freeze, scream, back away. She stepped forward. She saved. She cared. Nia didn't acknowledge the applause. She didn't bask in it or even seem to hear it. Her focus remained entirely on Liam, brushing his hair back gently from his forehead, checking his breathing one more time, whispering, you're okay, sweetheart," with the tenderness of someone who had learned how to comfort a scared child long before she ever had the chance to be one herself. Adrian watched her, his chest tightening in a way he couldn't describe. For years he had believed he was alone in this fight, that no one else truly understood the constant fear that clung to him, the fragile hope, the endless responsibility. He had trusted doctors, hired experts, followed every instruction, but no one had ever moved with this kind of instinct around his son. No one had ever stepped in with this level of confidence and care without being asked, without hesitation, without fear. Something inside him snapped, not in pain, but in realization, a sharp emotional clarity that left him unsteady. It wasn't admiration anymore, not just respect or gratitude. It was deeper, rawer, more urgent. He needed her, not romantically. His heart was still wrapped in old wounds he wasn't ready to reopen, but for Liam, for the little boy who deserved someone who saw him not as a medical case, but as a child. For the son whose world was already fragile enough without the fear of people who didn't know how to handle him. For the constant battle he lived every day against the limits of his body. And Adrian knew, with a certainty that scared him, that he could search an entire lifetime, spend every dollar he had, and never find what Nia gave so freely: genuine care. Care that wasn't bought, wasn't demanded, wasn't part of any job description. Care that came from her soul, from the parts of her heart shaped by love, loss, responsibility, and grief. Nia still didn't look at him. She was focused on Liam, humming a quiet tune to help regulate his breathing. But Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift so permanently he knew nothing in his life would look the same after this moment. Because money could buy nurses, therapists, programs, equipment. But it could never buy what he had witnessed just now: instinct, compassion, and a kind of courage that didn't flaunt itself. He realized he had been trying to protect Liam alone, carrying the weight of fear like a shadow he couldn't escape. But Nia didn't just lighten that weight, she held it as if she had been carrying pieces of it her entire life. And for the first time in years, Adrian felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Real, tangible hope. Hope that Liam could have more than just medical routines and structured therapy sessions. Hope that someone could see him the way a brother, a sister, a family member would. Hope that kindness still existed in the world in its purest form. When she finally lifted her eyes to meet his, Adrian's breath caught in his throat. Not because she was beautiful, though she was in a quiet, unassuming way, but because her eyes held something he had never seen directed at his son before. Not fear, not pity. Not obligation, just love. A human, gentle, instinctive love for a child she had known for only an hour, but understood as though she had known him forever. In that moment, Adrian knew the truth. His life had just changed, because she wasn't just someone who could help his son, she was someone who already had. When the meal ended, the soft clatter of plates and the quiet hum of conversations in the restaurant created a background Adrian barely noticed, because all of his attention was fixed on Nia and Liam. He rose from his seat slowly, as if the weight of what he was about to say had already pressed into his chest for weeks, and even the polished floors beneath him seemed to echo the rhythm of his racing heart. The words themselves were simple, almost startling in their directness, but carried with them the force of a lifetime of worry, fear, and the faint hope he had long tried to suppress. "I want to hire you," he said, his voice steady, though his throat felt tight and raw from years of silent prayers no one had heard. Nia blinked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief, lips parting in the beginnings of a question she didn't yet know how to frame. "As what?" she asked softly, unsure if she had understood him correctly, if perhaps the weight of the moment had shifted reality in a way that made her hear things that weren't really there. Adrian's gaze remained fixed on her, unblinking, unwavering. "My son's full-time caregiver," he said, leaving no room for misinterpretation, no allowance for doubt. The restaurant seemed to pause. Plates paused mid-reach on tables. A server carrying a tray froze as if suspended in midair. Even the low murmur of other diners dimmed, as though the universe itself leaned closer to witness the exchange. The gasp that escaped from somewhere in the back of the restaurant wasn't loud, but it resonated in the small, intimate space with the weight of incredulity. People exchanged glances, whispers traveling like wind through the tables, because what was happening was not just unusual, it was unprecedented. Nia stood frozen, her hands pressed to her apron as if to anchor herself against the sudden tidal wave of attention and the unfamiliar gravity of the situation. Shock fluttered across her features, mingling with something deeper: fear, doubt, disbelief, and an unspoken question. Could this really be happening? "Sir," she started, her voice barely above a whisper, uncertain and trembling, "I'm just a waitress." The words hung between them, fragile and earnest, the epitome of humility and disbelief, rolled into one small, trembling syllable. But Adrian didn't flinch. He leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice to a quiet, firm conviction that made it impossible for her to misinterpret the sincerity behind it. "You're not just anything," he said, each word deliberate, weighty, carrying the gravity of every sleepless night, every tear shed beside Liam's crib, every prayer whispered into the dark corners of his house. "You're the only person who saw my son." His words were not praise, not flattery, not idle sentiment. They were a declaration of truth, a recognition that transcended job titles, resumes, and social expectations. They were a statement that the work of love, patience, and understanding could never be measured by credentials alone. Adrian's eyes softened as he watched Liam reach for Nia's hand, his small fingers curling around hers with complete trust and unquestioning certainty. The boy, who so often struggled to connect, to respond, to communicate, had already made his choice, as if recognizing the same truth Adrian had only just spoken aloud, that Nia was more than capable, more than worthy, more than enough. Nia's gaze shifted from Liam to Adrian and back again, her lips parting slightly, the tremor in her chest betraying the whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. Relief, pride, fear, hope, and gratitude collided inside her in a way that left her momentarily silent. She knelt slightly, instinctively lowering herself to Liam's level, and whispered, almost to herself, almost as though grounding herself in the reality of what was happening, "I'll do it." The words, small and soft as they were, held the power to change the trajectory of 3 lives in a single breath. And in that moment, the restaurant exhaled along with them, the tension dissipating like a storm passing into calm. For Adrian, the decision was more than hiring help. It was the first time in years he had relinquished control, the first time he had trusted someone to see what he saw, to act with the same care, the same patience, and the same unwavering devotion. For Liam, it was the first time someone had moved through his world with an instinctive understanding, someone who didn't just follow instructions or check boxes, but truly saw him, truly acknowledged his presence and abilities, truly believed in his potential. For Nia, it was the acknowledgement that her past, her losses, her experiences had shaped her in ways that gave her not just skill, but a rare and invaluable insight, one that money could never buy, one that formal education could never replicate. From that moment on, everything changed, not instantly, not in dramatic explosions, but subtly, profoundly, irrevocably. The rhythm of their lives, previously dictated by fear and uncertainty, began to shift. A new sense of possibility entered the room, fragile yet undeniable. Adrian felt it in the way Liam leaned into Nia's presence without hesitation. He felt it in the quiet relief that eased into his chest, a relief so deep he could almost forget the years of worry that had preceded it. He felt it in the strange, humbling realization that sometimes the people you least expect to be heroes are the ones who transform your life completely, quietly, permanently. And as he watched Nia straighten, brushing imaginary crumbs from her apron, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of resolve and tenderness, Adrian knew that this was only the beginning. The boundaries of his world, so long defined by schedules, specialists, and clinical care, were about to expand, reshaped by a woman who saw humanity where others only saw limitations, who offered presence where others offered procedures, and who reminded him that sometimes the most important decisions in life weren't made in offices or boardrooms, but in the quiet recognition of a child's needs, the courage to step forward, and the willingness to be seen. That day, nothing would ever be the same. The small act of trust, the simple offer, the quiet affirmation of capability and care, these would ripple outward, changing not just Liam's life, not just Adrian's life, but the fabric of everything they knew about hope, love, and the extraordinary power of seeing a child and a person fully, truly, without reservation or doubt. From that moment on, the ordinary restaurant became a turning point, the ordinary meal became a declaration, and the ordinary waitress became something far greater than anyone could have predicted. Everything had changed. Weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost sacred, each day unfolding with small victories and quiet celebrations that no one outside their little world could fully understand. With Nia's help, Liam improved slowly, beautifully, in ways that were almost imperceptible at first, but accumulated into profound changes that reshaped the household from the inside out. He could hold a spoon longer without the panicked twitch of frustration in his tiny hand, getting it deliberately to his mouth with increasing confidence. He began to hum to music, the melodies she played no longer just background noise, but a guide, a language he was learning to speak with his body and soul, the notes marking his progress in ways charts and reports never could. Each smile that spread across his face was a sunrise Adrian hadn't realized he had been waiting for, a sign that hope was not just a fleeting concept, but a living, breathing presence in their lives. And Adrian himself changed alongside his son, though the transformation was quieter, internal, like water smoothing stones over time. He worked less, stepping away from the relentless drive that had consumed him for decades, allowing the endless hours of meetings, calls, and responsibilities to fade into the background as he sat with his son, truly present, feeling the weight of years he had missed and reclaiming them, piece by piece. He laughed more than he had in years, the sound foreign and beautiful to his own ears, a testament to the small miracles of patience, understanding, and attention. Their home, once a place dominated by schedules, therapies, and the invisible tension of what could go wrong, began to feel alive in a new way, warm and vibrant with the presence of genuine care and affection. One evening, as golden light spilled through the windows and dust motes danced lazily in the air, Liam lifted his shaky little hand, and in a deliberate gesture that took all the courage and coordination he could muster, reached out to touch Nia's face. It was a simple act, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to those who had witnessed the struggle, it was monumental, a voluntary, affectionate connection he had never offered before, an unspoken acknowledgement of trust, comfort, and love. Nia froze for a fraction of a second, then the tension in her shoulders melted as tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden, tracing lines down her cheeks. She blinked rapidly, trying to gather herself, to contain the flood of emotion that had been building silently for weeks, but it was impossible. Her face, illuminated by the soft evening glow, became a mirror of the profound impact of her presence in their lives. Adrian watched the moment unfold, feeling a tightness in his chest that was both overwhelming and liberating. He realized, as he observed her crying silently while Liam held her hand with a tentative but firm grip, that no amount of money, no therapy program, no high-priced expert could ever have created this. It wasn't the wealth that had changed their lives. It was something far rarer, far more powerful. It was kindness, pure and deliberate, paired with patience and an understanding that transcended instructions or manuals, that had carved a space for healing to occur. In that small, quiet gesture, in the gentle touch of a child learning to connect, and the tears of someone who had dedicated herself to his progress without expectation of reward, Adrian understood a truth that no wealth or influence could buy. That genuine care, given freely and consistently, had the power to transform, to heal, to create bonds that were unbreakable and tender all at once. And in that shared silence, the three of them, father, son, and the woman who had become both guardian and bridge, felt the unspoken shift in their lives. They were no longer just individuals navigating the challenges of a world that often seemed indifferent to difference. They were a family forged not by blood, but by presence, trust, love, and the quiet miracles that happen when someone chooses to see another fully, to nurture without impatience, to guide without judgment, and to love without conditions. Adrian's heart swelled with gratitude he could hardly articulate, a deep and abiding recognition that his son's progress, his own rediscovered joy, and the profound warmth filling their home were not results of wealth or planning, but of something human, something eternal, something that could not be bought. The steady, deliberate kindness of someone willing to care when it mattered most. He looked at Nia, tears glinting in her eyes, and then at Liam, whose tiny hand still rested against hers, and understood that this was the beginning of a life rebuilt, a life where fear and frustration no longer dominated, where laughter and trust could flourish, where the ordinary moments, spoonfuls of food, hums to a melody, a hand raised in affection, had become extraordinary milestones marking the rebirth of a family united by heart and presence rather than circumstance. It was in that quiet, golden evening that Adrian finally felt the impossible weight of worry lift, replaced by the gentle, unstoppable force of hope, healing, and the irreplaceable truth that kindness had done what wealth, power, and control never could. It had healed them all. One night, Nia found Adrian sitting quietly on the balcony. He rarely shared anything personal. But tonight he did. "I used to resent the world," he said. "Forgiving my son struggles no child deserves." Nia listened silently, "But watching you with him, I realized the world didn't fail him. I did. I was so afraid of losing him that I forgot to live with him." Nia placed her hand over his. "You're trying now," she whispered. "And that's what matters." For the first time, Adrian let himself cry. On Liam's 9th birthday, he made a sound Adrian had never heard before. A clear, high-pitched laugh. Not a forced one. A real one. He laughed because Nia blew bubbles around him, spinning, dancing, making funny faces. Adrian felt his heart shatter in the best way. When Liam reached for both of them at once, Adrian understood. This wasn't an employee. This was family. Months later, Adrian called a press conference. Reporters waited, expecting a business announcement. Instead, he said, "I'm stepping down for a year. My son needs me more than my companies do." Gasps echoed. "And I want to thank the person who taught me what true strength is." He looked at Nia. "She changed our lives, and because of her, we are building the Liam Foundation for children with motor disabilities." Cameras flashed. Nia wiped her tears. Adrian didn't care about the headlines anymore. He cared about his son. He cared about the woman who helped him see the world again. And he cared about the future they were building together.